It is the people who need to direct the civilian government. Understand that this is a coalition of government, big pharma, the law enforcement people, the prison people, the military-industrial complex. This is for their benefit. They are not doing any of this for your benefit. They're not keeping you off of drugs. Drugs are bigger than they've ever been after 40 years. But so is their business, whether it's the prison business, the law enforcement business, you name it. And of course, they're also supplying the drugs. Now let's take a look at Chicago. Chicago is going to be paying out $5.5 million in compensation to victims who are tortured by the city's police. People said that was a conspiracy theory. It didn't really happen. This is The Independent reporting this. This is $5.5 million, mainly focused around one individual, but there were others as well. This is what Rahm Emanuel says. He says, "We are strong enough to say that we were wrong. Chicago will finally confront its past and come to terms with it." Will they? Will they really? See, back in 2007, they already paid out $19.8 million to people that were tortured by a police commander, John Burge. He was sent to prison for 4.5 years because of perjury, because he lied about the torturing. Not because he tortured, but because he lied about the torturing and was caught in doing that. And it was actually a hung jury when they came up for the police brutality issues. But the prosecutor decided not to prosecute again. See, if they have a hung jury, they can take you up to 3 times, and they do that for small medical marijuana people. I've seen this happen many times, but not for the cop, which makes you wonder if the prosecution was really very energetic in the first place. So they've already paid out nearly $20 million in 2007. Now they're paying out another $5.5 million because there were people that spent years of their life in jail for crimes that they did not commit because they were tortured by the Chicago police and they made a false confession. Now, one of the things that we're going to see as this tyranny gets worse is taking away our cash. And there was an article on INFOWARS.com today. Denmark moves towards a cashless society. They may become the first cashless society in the world. They say the Danish government has said that as of next year, businesses like clothing retailers, restaurants, gas stations should no longer be legally bound to accept cash payments. And here's the justification that they offer for this. They say, well, we're going to reduce costs and increase productivity for Danish businesses. Really? No, they're going to increase profits for the banks because the banks get a cut of every credit card transaction. You understand that. That doesn't happen with cash. There isn't any cost associated with cash. The banks don't make any money off of cash unless they charge you a fee, a tax to deposit that cash. There's a little bit of that that goes on, but they charge way more in credit card transaction charges. So this is something that is going to benefit the banks. It's not going to benefit the small retailers. That is a total lie. It's a total spin. And then they say, of course, there are fears that moving to a totally cashless society would increase the risk of fraud. Yeah, probably will. But they say that, and they point out that cases of credit card fraud have doubled in the last decade in Denmark. But don't worry, because Danske Bank has taken steps to fight fraud. What are they going to do? They're going to link individuals' mobile pay accounts to their national insurance numbers. There you go. That's what's really behind it. That's the cut for the government. Say the banks get their credit card fees paid much, much higher than they ever would with cash. And then the bank can track you like an animal. And we're going to talk about that when we come back with Rob Dew. That is the basis of the mastering the human domain. That's the logo for Jade Helm, and we're going to break that down for you when we come back. But first, we're going to have a special report from Rob Jacobson about a new term that's trending, used by the Department of Justice and by the FBI to create a racist environment without blaming the cops for being racist. It's called unconscious bias. And it allows them to also use psychological tools to get into the heads of the police force and manipulate them. So stay with us. We're going to have that report right after the break.
My name is Alex Jones. Most of you know me from my syndicated radio program and my documentary films, as well as INFOWARS Nightly News. When I got on air 20 years ago, I had discovered the globalist program, their plan to take over the world, and my focus went from running 6 miles every other day, swimming 2-3 miles a couple times a week, and lifting weights to focusing on fighting the globalist. I've gone from 279 pounds all the way down to 235 pounds, and the weight's going off even faster. Super Male Vitality, Survival Shield X2 Nascent Iodine, and Oxy Powder. Those three products of the entire family of InfoWarsLife.com products are the most important from my own personal experience. And it wasn't just that my weight loss accelerated. My muscle mass increased. My stamina, my energy levels exploded. Now is the time to take action. Start your journey today with the Alex Challenge Pack. It's the trifecta of change. Secure yours today and get free shipping for a limited time at InfoWarsLife.com or 888-253-3139. For all of recorded history, civilizations around the world praised the health benefits of silver. At InfoWars Life, our mission is to bring you the highest quality, purest, cleanest, effective colloidal silver on the market today for the lowest price available. When it comes to you and your family's health, InfoWarsLife.com is very excited to announce our biggest run yet of Silver Bullet colloidal silver, exclusively available at InfoWarsLife.com. Now, InfoWarsLife.com has taken colloidal silver to the next level using a cutting-edge technique that is free of toxic artificial additives. Now more than ever, it's important to stock up on high-quality Silver Bullet from InfoWarsLife.com and to help others during Christmas by teaching them about the powerful benefits of silver. Secure your Silver Bullet today at InfoWarsLife.com or by calling toll-free 888-253-3139.
What's wrong? You don't like a small group of psychopaths ruining your country? Well, become President of the United States and change it from the... Never mind.
3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas. President Kennedy has been seriously wounded by this shooting.
Much research points to the widespread existence of unconscious bias.
But then there are the unconscious biases.
Unconscious bias.
Implicit racial bias.
There's a new trend, a new term, unconscious bias, or as it's sometimes called, implicit bias.
That surprise and the behaviors associated with it are the product of something called unconscious bias.
Everyone from government workers to private employees are all being compelled to take a good look at their unconscious minds and the hidden biases that lurk beneath. Experts claim that biases prevent employees from being productive and creative, while it hinders government employees' ability to make sound decisions. If the idea of the establishment evaluating your most hidden thoughts and emotions to determine if you're politically correct enough to function, that doesn't sit well with you, you're not alone. It's easy to dismiss the importance of the subject of the unconscious mind as simply a concept used by psychiatrists to better understand their patients. But we live in a world where you can't turn your head without being bombarded by some advertiser's attempt to influence our unconscious minds and behaviors. On top of the excessive attempts to manipulate our behavior through subliminal suggestions in the media, the psychiatric profession also serves the establishment as a convenient way to sidestep our entire judicial system with tools like the Hare Psychopath Checklist Revise, a PCLR, that they can use to directly incarcerate whoever they label as institutional. Criminal profiling has been a popular establishment tool since World War II. According to historian Gary Lachman, who stated in his 2010 book, Jung the Mystic, it was Carl Jung himself who in 1942 met with the one and only Alan Dulles and began a, quote, experimental marriage between espionage and psychology, unquote, involving the psychological profile of political and military leaders. Shortly after, psychoanalyst Walter C. Langer submitted to the OSS, the predecessor to the CIA, a report that probed the psychology of Adolf Hitler. Thus, the institution of psychological profiling was born, and it has grown into an uncontrollable beast. We've all heard the controversy over the TSA profiling suspected terrorists or threats, and how absolutely absurd it is to believe that the TSA can actually be trained to detect a person's inner agenda just by glancing at him in a busy airport terminal for about 5 seconds. Which brings us to the latest trend in psychological tyranny, the unconscious bias examination. The term was virtually unknown on the web just a few months ago. Now there are literally hundreds of articles on the subject. The articles are mostly pressuring large corporations to begin subjecting their employees to this degrading, unproven, intrusive requirement. And of course, the government is already forcing its own workers to evaluate their own unconscious minds. On March 19, 2015, the Washington Times published an article titled, "Federal Workers Ordered to Probe Their Unconscious Bias." They say a top U.S. Forest Service executive told his employees to probe their own unconscious bias on everything from race and sexuality to the disabled and fat people, asking them to use an unproven assessment tool to explore their feelings. The online test, which the Forest Management Director urged other agency directors to use as well, specifically warns of problems when it's taken outside of the safeguards of a research institution. Users are also told to be careful about how far to go in interpreting the results. In an AP article on March 9th of this year, titled "Police Agencies Line Up to Learn About Unconscious Bias," we find that police from all over the country are now being flown to LA to a place called the Museum of Tolerance. There they can learn how to evaluate and control their unconscious bias before making any potentially biased, therefore bad or perhaps fatal decisions. The head of the Justice Department program that offers this training to police departments says, without even a hint of irony in talking about the unconscious bias of the police, this is one tool that police leaders are using to help really ensure their agencies engage in conscious policing. According to the head of the Justice Department's Community-Oriented Policing Services program, the one offering the training. Nobody can argue that conscious policing is a good thing, and in the midst of a tense situation, a conscious, clear head is a requirement. But that's not what they're talking about. Some researchers caution that there's not enough evidence to show that implicit bias training is effective. As others have pointed out, this could potentially endanger officers by making them slower to recognize threats for fear of being called biased, or it could endanger the public by making them shoot even quicker. And they point out the training's benefits could quickly disappear when an officer gets back into the real world, or it could even increase racial bias in the long term. FBI Director James Comey said recently that rifts between police and communities can't be fully bridged until we acknowledge unconscious bias.
Much research points to the widespread existence of unconscious bias. If we can't help our latent biases, we can help our behavior in response to those instinctive reactions.
What about holding police accountable for their actions? Wouldn't that be a better start than an abstract examination into a police officer's mind that might impair his reaction time, putting him in grave danger? There's also a huge push for the private sector to utilize this technique for increased creativity and productivity, and not surprisingly to root out any potential gender issues that are floating around just below the surface. Administering an exam based on unproven techniques that can affect a person's employment status sounds like a recipe for disaster. Let's not forget about the other possible consequences of introducing a compulsory system and probing a person's unconscious mind in an inappropriate setting, in this case, the workplace. Forcing people to examine their minds in this way, when they're not prepared in this kind of a setting, can involuntarily surface repressed emotions, memories, trauma. Without the aid of a trained professional to help deal correctly with these lost feelings, a person can experience what is known as re-traumatization and cause a person to go into deep depression, nervous breakdown, or even suicide. And finally, this kind of testing at work opens up possibilities for singling people out. If the police training facility called the Museum of Tolerance doesn't raise the Orwellian eyebrow, just think about the fact that the unthought is still a thought crime. Someone can be labeled, stigmatized, have their life ruined, all based on a test that, without proof, alleges to detect hidden thoughts, feelings, and motivations. Just a few months back, then Attorney General Eric Holder used unconscious bias to describe racial bias present in the Ferguson police force.
Our review of the evidence found no alternative explanation for the disproportionate impact on African American residents other than implicit and explicit racial bias.
It's clear that the establishment has been toying with this new tool for a little while, and they're rolling it out now. Considering how abusive the government is with other methods provided to them by the psychiatric profession, imagine how much more abusive it will get when everywhere you go, you will not only be judged for your actions and thoughts, but also judged for thoughts that others claim you have the potential for having. It would be a mistake not to observe how the media is bombarding us with headlines associating the term
unconscious bias, mostly with gender bias.